Millions of dollars burned every 60 seconds. A ruthless billionaire executive watched her legacy crumble as the world's most elite engineers declared a $50 million machine officially dead. Yet, while panic gripped the boardroom, a desperate father with greasy hands recognized a sound nobody else heard, changing everything forever. Panic is rarely a silent affair. But inside the hyper-sterile, environmentally controlled cleanroom of Stewart Aerospace, the silence was deafening. The facility, a gleaming cathedral of modern engineering located on the outskirts of Seattle, usually hummed with the rhythmic heartbeat of cutting-edge manufacturing. Today, it felt like a morgue. At the center of the sprawling floor stood the Weissener Titangent X, a proprietary $50 million precision microlithography calibrator. It was a marvel of Swiss engineering, responsible for machining the microscopic propulsion nozzles for a highly classified $4 billion Department of Defense satellite contract. And it was completely, undeniably dead. Bianca Stewart stood before the massive machine, her arms crossed tight against her chest, her sharp blue eyes narrowed in a cold fury that made the executives around her physically recoil. Bianca had not become a self-made billionaire by 39 through gentle patience. She had inherited a bankrupt aviation parts supplier from her late father and ruthlessly transformed it into an aerospace titan. She understood the brutal math of the industry: deliver on time or be utterly destroyed. The DoD contract had a hard delivery deadline exactly 14 days away. If the first batch of propulsion units was not handed over, Stewart Aerospace would trigger a default clause so severe it would plunge the company into immediate liquidation. "Explain to me," Bianca began, her voice a deadly, quiet hiss that echoed off the epoxy floors, how a machine that cost more than a private island has been reduced to a 5-ton paperweight. Gregory Horton, the chief engineer, swallowed hard. His pristine white lab coat was marred by dark patches of perspiration. "Miss Stewart, we've run every diagnostic protocol. The Swiss team from Weissener Precision has been here for 72 straight hours. They flew in their senior architects. They've given up." "Given up?" Bianca snapped, whipping her head toward Gregory. "Did you just say the manufacturer gave up?" Gregory gestured nervously toward a group of exhausted-looking men in gray jumpsuits, packing up Pelican cases near the exit. Their lead engineer, Dr. Eris Thorne, Gregory stopped, correcting himself. "Excuse me, Doctor." Eris Hoffman stated that the central magnetic spindle housing has suffered a catastrophic harmonic warp. It's an unprecedented failure in the titanium lattice. A software glitch caused the spindle to over-rotate, micro-fracturing the entire central column. "So fix it," Bianca demanded. "We can't," Gregory's voice cracked. "No one can. The spindle is cast in a vacuum chamber in Geneva. It requires a bespoke curing process." Hoffman says they have to fabricate an entirely new core, fly it over, and calibrate it. The lead time is 8 months, minimum. Bianca felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. 8 months. She had 14 days. She looked up at the massive digital clock mounted on the factory wall, its red LED numbers counting down the seconds to the DoD deadline. "There has to be a bypass," Bianca insisted, marching closer to the dormant Titangent X. "A physical override, a way to stabilize the spindle manually." The manufacturer explicitly stated that tampering with the housing will shatter the ceramic bearings and destroy the machine entirely, Gregory pleaded, stepping in her path. "Miss Stewart, it's over. We need to call the Pentagon. We need to trigger the force majeure clause. If we beg for an extension..." "The Pentagon doesn't care about our excuses, Gregory," Bianca interrupted, her voice devoid of emotion. "They care about orbital superiority. If we fail, they will hand this contract to our competitors before the sun sets, and Stewart Aerospace will cease to exist. I will not lose my father's legacy because a group of arrogant European engineers built a glass jaw into my assembly line." She turned her back on her chief engineer, staring into the dark, reflective glass of the machine's blast shield. The manufacturer had washed their hands of it. Her own engineers were practically weeping. The most advanced technological minds on the continent had declared it unfixable. Bianca was a woman who solved problems with money, leverage, and sheer force of will, but for the first time in her life, she was staring at a wall that could not be knocked down. She needed a miracle. She just didn't know that one was currently pushing a mop cart in the cargo bay. Ainsley Steves did not look like a miracle. He looked like a man who had been slowly beaten down by gravity, bad luck, and the crushing weight of a broken healthcare system. Sitting at the battered formica table of his dimly lit apartment, Ainsley stared blankly at a sprawling fan of overdue bills, the red ink screaming "Final Notice" blurred together under the flickering kitchen light. Ainsley ran a callous, oil-stained hand through his graying hair. He was 42, though the deep lines etched around his eyes made him look 10 years older. For 12 years, he had been a machinist's mate first class in the United States Navy, spending his youth deep in the bowels of nuclear submarines, coaxing impossible performance out of failing turbines with nothing but a wrench and a preternatural intuition for mechanics. He didn't just understand machines, he felt them. He could listen to the hum of a multi-ton engine and diagnose a misaligned bearing just by the acoustic pitch. But the civilian world didn't care about mechanical intuition. They cared about degrees, certifications, and corporate politics, things Ainsley severely lacked. After an honorable discharge, he had found work at an industrial plant, only to be laid off when the company relocated its manufacturing overseas. Now, he cobbled together a living fixing obscure machinery, repairing old diesel truck engines, and taking whatever manual labor gigs he could find. It wasn't enough. It was nowhere near enough. A soft cough echoed from the tiny bedroom down the hall. Ainsley instantly stiffened. He stood up quietly, his worn boots making no sound on the cheap linoleum floor, and pushed the bedroom door open. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a shallow, labored rhythm. Beside her bed, a medical CPAP machine hummed softly, keeping her airway open. Lily suffered from a severe congenital thoracic restriction, a rare condition where the cartilage in her rib cage aggressively hardened, restricting her lung capacity. The doctors had been clear. She needed a specialized reconstructive surgery before her 9th birthday to expand her chest cavity. Without it, her lungs would begin to fail. The surgery was highly experimental, entirely out of network, and required an upfront deposit of $40,000. Ainsley currently had $342 to his name. He walked over, gently pulling the blanket up to her chin, and kissed her forehead. "I'm going to fix this, Bug," he whispered into the dark. "I promise." His cheap, prepaid cell phone vibrated violently in his pocket. Ainsley stepped out of the room, shutting the door tightly before answering. "Artie, you awake, man?" It was Dennis Carmichael, an old Navy buddy who now managed the overnight logistics and janitorial crews for several massive industrial parks. "I'm awake, Dennis. What's going on?" "Listen, I know you've been asking for extra shifts. Something massive just hit the fan over at the Stewart Aerospace plant. Total panic. They fired half their maintenance crew in a blind rage tonight, and they need heavy lifters to clear out Sector 4. They're hauling away massive scrap and moving diagnostic rigs. It's grunt work, moving crates and pushing carts, but the shift supervisor is panicking. He's offering triple time, cash under the table, just to get warm bodies on the floor before the CEO loses her mind again. You want in? Triple time. It would barely make a dent in the $40,000, but Ainsley couldn't afford to say no. Every dollar was a breath of air for Lily. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Ainsley said. "Wear clean boots, Artie," Dennis warned. "This place is a Class 1 clean room environment. They'll put you in a sterile suit, but the floors are pristine. And for the love of God, keep your head down." The CEO, Stewart, she's on the floor tonight and she is executing people. Do not look at her. Do not speak to her. Just move the boxes. "I'm just there to lift heavy things, Dennis. I don't care about corporate drama." Ainsley hung up the phone, grabbed his worn canvas jacket, and took one last look at the stack of medical bills. He locked the apartment door behind him, stepping out into the cold, damp Seattle night. He had no idea what Stewart Aerospace did, and he certainly didn't care about their billionaire CEO. He just needed to survive the night. The sheer scale of the Stewart Aerospace facility was staggering. When Ainsley arrived, he was immediately shoved through a frantic security checkpoint, handed a disposable white Tyvek suit, a hairnet, and a pair of anti-static shoe covers. The air inside the factory smelled sharp and metallic, laced with ozone and the faint scent of panic. Ainsley was assigned to a logistics crew instructed to clear away heavy diagnostic equipment that had been abandoned by the departing Swiss engineers. He kept his head down, muscling massive Pelican cases onto a hydraulic pallet jack. The work was mind-numbing, but Ainsley appreciated the steady physical exertion. It kept his mind off the suffocating anxiety of Lily's hospital debts. As he wheeled a particularly heavy cart toward the loading dock, his path took him directly past Sector 4. A massive crowd of executives, engineers in lab coats, and security personnel formed a tense perimeter around a colossal cylindrical machine that looked like something out of a science fiction film. In the center of the storm was a woman Ainsley assumed was Bianca Stewart. She was striking, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that seemed entirely out of place on a factory floor, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, merciless bun. She was currently screaming at a large video monitor, displaying the face of a terrified-looking European man. "I don't accept your parameters, Dr. Hoffman." Bianca's voice cut through the hum of the factory like a scalpel. "You built this machine! You guaranteed a failure rate of less than 0.01%. And now you're telling me the spindle is warped?" "Miss Stewart, please," the man on the screen pleaded, his heavy Swiss-German accent thick with exhaustion. "The telemetry data does not lie." The central magnetic ring experienced a hyper-resonance event. The titanium lattice has microfractured. "It is fundamentally compromised." "Turn it on," Bianca commanded. Gregory Horton, standing nervously to her left, gasped. "Miss Stewart, no! If we run power through a fractured spindle, the friction will spark. It could ignite the internal lubricants. It will destroy the entire casing. Turn it on." Bianca stepped closer to Gregory, her eyes blazing. "If it's already dead, we have nothing to lose. I want to see the failure. I want the exact telemetry of the crash logged on our servers so I can sue Weissner Precision into the Stone Age. Power it up." Gregory's hands shook violently as he turned to a technician at the control console and nodded. Ainsley, pausing by his pallet jack about 30 feet away, watched with passive curiosity. He had seen officers in the Navy throw similar tantrums when millions of dollars of hardware failed. He leaned against his heavy cart, waiting for the path to clear. The technician pressed a sequence of buttons. A deep, heavy bass hum began to vibrate through the epoxy floor. The Titangent X was waking up. Inside the thick glass casing, an enormous metallic cylinder began to spin, accelerating rapidly. The hum rose in pitch, transforming into a high, whining screech. Suddenly, a violent shudder racked the machine. The screech was interrupted by a horrifying sound, a rapid, rhythmic, clack-clack-clack grind. It sounded like metal, violently tearing itself apart. Warning sirens flared to life, casting the clean room in flashing amber light. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Gregory screamed, covering his ears. The technician slammed the emergency stop. The massive spindle slowly groaned to a halt, the sickening, grinding noise echoing until the machine fell dead once more. Bianca stared at the machine, her face pale, the reality of her ruined empire finally settling over her shoulders. The Swiss engineer on the monitor shook his head sadly. "As you can see, Miss Stewart, the warp is terminal." Ainsley stood perfectly still. His hands were gripping the handle of the pallet jack so tightly, his knuckles were white. His mind was racing, accessing thousands of hours spent in the claustrophobic engine rooms of nuclear submarines. He replayed the sound in his head. The high pitch, the shudder, the clack-clack-clack grind. It wasn't a warped titanium lattice. A warp made a sustained, tearing shriek. A warp caused a machine to vibrate out of rhythm. This vibration had been perfectly rhythmic. It was acoustic geometry. Ainsley knew that sound intimately. It was the sound of a magnetic slip ring that had jumped its track by a fraction of a millimeter, causing the internal sensors to misread the velocity, which in turn forced the braking mechanism to fire intermittently. The machine was literally fighting itself. It wasn't broken. It was just confused. Before his rational brain could stop him, before he could remember Dennis's warning to keep his head down, Ainsley let go of his pallet jack. He stepped past the yellow caution tape, walking directly into the circle of executives. "Hey!" a security guard barked, stepping forward. "You can't be in here! Get back to the freight line!" Ainsley ignored him. He walked straight toward the massive glass casing of the Titangent X, his eyes scanning the lower maintenance panels. "Who the hell is this?" Gregory Horton yelled, his face flushing red as he realized a lowly contractor in a dirty Tyvek suit was approaching his multi-million-dollar machine. "Security, remove him immediately." Two burly guards lunged forward, grabbing Ainsley's arms. "It's not warped," Ainsley said, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the shouting. He didn't yell, but the sheer, absolute certainty in his tone made the room fall silent. Bianca Stewart slowly turned, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Ainsley. She took in his cheap boots, his grease-stained hands visible beneath the cuffs of his sterile suit, and the tired, unshaven face of a man who clearly did not belong in her executive circle. "What did you just say?" Bianca asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I said, it's not warped," Ainsley repeated, shaking off the security guards. He pointed a calloused finger at the Titangent X. "You're listening to it wrong." A fractured titanium lattice would scream on a variable frequency. That grinding was a steady 4-to-4 beat. Your magnetic slip ring at the base of the spindle is misaligned. It's tripping your braking sensors. The software thinks the machine is over-rotating, so it's slamming the emergency brakes while the engine is trying to accelerate. Gregory let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Are you insane? We have the finest engineers in Europe telling us the core is destroyed, and you, a janitor, think you can diagnose a microlithography calibrator by listening to it? Ainsley didn't look at Gregory. He kept his eyes locked firmly on Bianca. He saw the desperation hidden behind her cold exterior. He saw a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. I don't care what your European engineers told you, Ainsley said flatly. They're relying on software diagnostics. The software is what's lying to them. The machine is physically fine. Bianca stared at him, her mind calculating 1,000 variables a second. And how would you know this? Because, Ainsley said, taking a step closer to the billionaire, I spent 12 years fixing experimental propulsion turbines under 300 feet of ocean. Physics is physics, lady, whether it's a submarine or a fancy Swiss blender. Dr. Hoffman's voice barked from the monitor. Miss Stewart, this is absurd. The slip ring is housed inside a sealed vacuum chamber. It is impossible to access without voiding the warranty and permanently compromising the clean seal. If I'm wrong, Ainsley said, looking at Bianca, you fire me, kick me out, and you lose your company in 14 days anyway. Bianca tilted her head, a strange, dangerous glint in her eyes. And if you're right, Ainsley thought of the crushing medical bills. He thought of Lily's small, labored breaths. He looked at the billionaire CEO, surrounded by panicked men in lab coats, and decided to push all his chips to the center of the table. If I'm right, Ainsley said, his voice steady as stone, you're going to pay me $40,000, cash. Gregory gasped, looking as though he might faint. The room plunged into a dead, stunned silence. No one made demands of Bianca Stewart. No one. Bianca looked at the broken machine, then back to the desperate, fiercely confident man standing before her. She didn't blink. You have 2 minutes, Bianca said. Show me. Tension suffocated the clean room. Every executive, engineer, and security guard stood frozen, their eyes darting between the towering, multi-million-dollar Titangent X and the man in the dirty boots who had just promised to fix it. Bianca Stewart did not break eye contact with Ainsley. She raised her hand, silencing the panicked protests of her chief engineer, Gregory Horton, before he could even open his mouth. 2 minutes, Bianca repeated, her tone razor-sharp. What do you need? A non-magnetic beryllium copper mallet, a 14mm deep socket, and a heavy-duty pry bar, Ainsley replied instantly. And I need your technician to bypass the primary safety interlocks on the lower housing. Gregory's face drained of color. Miss Stewart, this is absolute insanity. Bypassing the safety interlocks on a live kinetic core is a violation of every OSHA protocol on the books. If he strikes the housing with a mallet, the kinetic shockwave will shatter the internal ceramic bearings. The machine will explode. On the video monitor, Dr. Hoffman was practically tearing his hair out. I forbid this. As the lead architect of Weissner Precision, I am officially voiding your warranty. If that brute touches the vacuum seal, Stewart Aerospace assumes all liability for the $50 million loss. Bianca slowly turned her gaze to the monitor. Her eyes were as cold as orbital space. Dr. Hoffman, you have already declared this machine dead. You abandoned my factory floor. You told me to wait 8 months for a new core while my company goes bankrupt. As of this exact second, you don't have a warranty to void. I am the warranty. She turned to a stunned maintenance worker standing near the toolbox carts. Get him the tools. Now. Within 30 seconds, a heavy canvas tool bag was dropped at Ainsley's feet. He didn't hesitate. Unzipping his sterile Tyvek suit to his waist to allow his arms full range of motion, he grabbed the brass-hued mallet and the socket wrench, then dropped to his knees at the base of the massive cylindrical machine. Technician, Ainsley barked, his voice carrying the undeniable authority of a chief petty officer issuing battle orders. Kill the safety interlocks and prep the manual ignition sequence. Hover your hand over the emergency stop. When I yell, you hit it. Not a second before. Understand? The young technician looked at Bianca, who gave a single curt nod. Interlocks disabled, the technician stammered, his fingers trembling over the console. Ainsley slid underneath the heavy titanium overhang of the Titangent X. The floor was cold, but Ainsley's focus was entirely consumed by the labyrinth of steel, wiring, and magnetic shielding above him. He located the central base plate, a thick, circular disc of reinforced alloy held in place by 8 massive security bolts. This was the barrier protecting the vacuum-sealed spindle housing. Clack. Ainsley locked the 14mm socket onto the first bolt. He didn't just loosen it. He applied exact, calculated torque, backing out 4 specific bolts while leaving the other 4 tightened. What is he doing? Gregory whispered in horror. He's destabilizing the primary load-bearing plate. Ainsley ignored the chatter. By loosening half the plate, he had created a microscopic gap barely a fraction of a millimeter between the heavy shielding and the internal slip ring carriage. He wedged the heavy-duty pry bar into the microscopic seam, gripping it with his left hand while hefting the heavy beryllium mallet in his right. "Turn it on!" Ainsley shouted from beneath the machine. "You can't be underneath it when it spins!" Dr. Hoffman screamed through the monitor speakers. "The torque will rip the base plate off!" "Turn it on!" Bianca roared, her voice echoing through the massive facility. The technician slammed the ignition sequence. The deep, heavy bass hum returned, vibrating through the epoxy floor and straight up Ainsley's spine. Above him, the massive core began to rotate. The pitch whined higher and higher. Then came the shudder. Clack, 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 grind. The deafening, sickening sound of metal tearing itself apart filled the room. Sparks began to arc behind the glass casing. Amber warning lights strobed violently. The entire 5-ton machine vibrated, threatening to shake itself off its reinforced mounts. Ainsley closed his eyes. He didn't look at the sparks. He didn't look at the shaking metal. He listened. He felt the rhythm of the machine. The slip ring wasn't broken. It was snagged, caught in a microscopic groove of factory-milled imperfection, causing the magnetic sensors to violently stutter. He needed to physically force the ring back onto its proper magnetic track while it was rotating at 3,000 revolutions per minute. It was a maneuver that required timing so precise no software could calculate it. It required human intuition. Clack, clack, clack. Ainsley flexed his grip on the pry bar, applying upward pressure against the base plate. Clack, clack, clack. He waited for the exact apex of the shudder, the microsecond where the slip ring hit the snag. Clack, clack, clack. Whack. Ainsley swung the heavy mallet, striking the pry bar with explosive, bone-rattling force. The blunt impact sent a perfectly targeted kinetic shockwave straight through the base plate and into the slip ring housing. For one agonizing second, the machine let out an ear-splitting, metallic shriek. Gregory covered his eyes, bracing for shrapnel. The technician lunged for the emergency stop. "Don't touch it!" Ainsley roared, rolling out from under the machine and leaping to his feet. The technician froze. The shrieking stopped. The shuddering ceased. The violent, rhythmic grinding dissolved instantly into thin air. Slowly, beautifully, the sound transitioned into a smooth, high-pitched, perfect harmonic hum. The heavy vibration in the floor vanished. The machine wasn't fighting itself anymore. It was purring like a giant, $50 million mechanical panther. On the central control console, the sea of flashing red warning lights blinked out. The digital displays flickered, recalibrated, and suddenly flooded the screen with a solid, glowing green line of telemetry. Core stabilization, 100%. Rotational velocity, nominal. Harmonic variance, 0%. Absolute, stunned silence fell over the clean room, save for the flawless hum of the Tangent X. Gregory Horton's jaw practically unhinged. He stared at the telemetry screen, then at the machine, then at Ainsley, completely incapable of forming words. On the video monitor, Dr. Hoffman was frozen in sheer disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered, his accent thick with shock. That defies the structural physics of the housing. You just aligned a magnetic slip ring blind with a hammer." "It's not impossible, Doc," Ainsley said, his chest heaving slightly as he tossed the heavy mallet back into the canvas tool bag. "You built a beautiful machine, but your assembly line over-tightened the southeast retention bolt by about 3 degrees. Over time, the thermal expansion pulled the slip ring off its track. Your software read it as a warp. It was just a snag." Ainsley walked closer to the video monitor, his grease-stained hands resting on his hips. "And by the way, that retention bolt? It was sealed with industrial red Loctite and stamped with a factory degradation seal. A seal designed to fail after exactly 1,000 hours of thermal cycling, right around the time your standard warranty expires." Bianca Stewart's head snapped toward the monitor. The dangerous, predatory glint in her eyes flared into an absolute inferno. "Planned obsolescence," she whispered, the words dripping with venom. Dr. Hoffman paled drastically. "Miss Stewart, I assure you, that is an unfounded accusation." "Save it for the international tribunals, Hoffman," Bianca interrupted, her voice a deadly calm. "You deliberately engineered a microflaw into the world's most expensive calibrator to extort my company for multi-million-dollar replacement cores. I'm going to take this telemetry data, I'm going to take the physical evidence, and I'm going to dismantle Weissner Precision piece by piece, cut his feed. The monitor went black. Bianca turned back to the room. Her empire was no longer crumbling. The DoD contract was saved. She looked at the green telemetry screen, then slowly turned her gaze to Ainsley. He was already zipping his Tyvek suit back up, bending down to grab the handles of his pallet jack. He looked exhausted, like a man who had just sprinted a marathon and only wanted to go to sleep. "Start the production sequence," Bianca ordered Gregory, not taking her eyes off Ainsley. "Run the first batch of propulsion nozzles tonight. If so much as a single micron is out of alignment, I will throw you off the roof myself." Gregory scrambled to the console. "Yes, Miss Stewart. Immediately." Bianca walked through the crowd of stunned executives, stepping over the yellow caution tape, and stopped directly in front of Ainsley. "You're leaving?" she asked. "I finished my job," Ainsley said softly, his deep voice stripped of all adrenaline, "and my shift supervisor is probably going to fire me for abandoning my freight cart." "Leave the cart," Bianca commanded. "Walk with me." The executive wing of Stewart Aerospace was a stark contrast to the chaotic factory floor. Here, the floors were polished Italian marble, the walls lined with sound-dampening acoustic panels that swallowed the noise of the outside world. Ainsley walked awkwardly beside Bianca, painfully aware of his grease-stained hands and the cheap boots squeaking against the pristine floor. Bianca led him into her private office, a sprawling, glass-walled sanctum overlooking the illuminated Seattle skyline. She walked over to a heavy mahogany desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound checkbook. $40,000, Bianca said, her pen hovering over the paper. "That was your price." Most men who just saved a $4 billion government contract would have asked for 10 times that amount, or stock options, or at the very least a brand new truck. Why exactly $40,000? Ainsley stood near the doorway, refusing to sit on the imported leather chairs. He looked out the massive windows at the city lights, his mind drifting back to the small, dark apartment and the humming CPAP machine. "It's for my daughter Lily," Ainsley said, his voice unusually quiet. "She has a congenital thoracic restriction. Her ribs are crushing her lungs. The experimental surgery to fix it out of network requires a $40,000 deposit." "I had $300 this morning." Bianca stopped writing. She slowly placed the pen down on the desk. For the first time all night, the ruthless, impenetrable armor of the billionaire CEO seemed to fracture, revealing something starkly human underneath. She looked at the calloused, exhausted man standing in her office, a man who had risked federal trespassing charges and potential physical injury just to secure enough cash to let his little girl breathe. She understood that kind of desperation. It was the same desperation she had felt when her father died, leaving her a bankrupt company surrounded by corporate vultures waiting to pick the bones clean. She had survived by being ruthless. Ainsley had survived by being brilliant. "You spent 12 years in the Navy?" Bianca asked, leaning against the edge of her desk. "Machinist's mate first class," Ainsley confirmed. "Submarines. Kept the turbines spinning under the ice." "And when you got out?" "Found out nobody cares how well you can align a magnetic drive if you don't have a piece of paper from an engineering college," Ainsley said with a bitter half-smile. "Been pushing brooms and fixing diesel trucks ever since." Bianca picked up the checkbook. Slowly, deliberately, she tore the blank check in half, letting the pieces flutter into a silver wastebasket. Ainsley's heart violently dropped into his stomach. The adrenaline evaporated, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. "Look, lady, we had a deal. I fixed your machine. I didn't break anything. You owe me that money." "I am not giving you $40,000, Mr. Steves," Bianca said, her voice entirely devoid of its previous hostility. She reached into a different drawer and pulled out a thick, legal-sized document folder, tossing it onto the center of the mahogany desk. "I am giving you a signing bonus of $100,000, effectively immediately," Bianca stated, locking eyes with him, "along with a starting salary of $250,000 a year. You are going to take the title of Chief Director of Mechanical Diagnostics for Stewart Aerospace." Ainsley stared at her, completely paralyzed. I don't have an engineering degree." "I don't care if you don't have a high school diploma," Bianca fired back, her tone resolute. "I just watched my $50 million chief engineer nearly wet himself in terror while you diagnosed a microacoustic harmonic failure with your bare ears and a brass hammer. Degrees don't keep the assembly line running, Ainsley. Results do. You see the mechanics of this world in a way my entire R&D department doesn't. I need that on my floor." Ainsley's legs felt weak. He took a hesitant step toward the desk, looking down at the heavy contract. "My daughter. By signing this contract, you are enrolled in our Platinum Executive Healthcare tier," Bianca continued, tapping a manicured finger against the paperwork. It covers 100% of all medical, surgical, and experimental procedures anywhere in the world. No deductibles, no out-of-network denials. You get her the surgery tomorrow morning. You put it on the company insurance, and if the hospital gives you so much as a single piece of red tape, you tell them Stewart Aerospace's legal team will descend upon them like a biblical plague. Ainsley tried to speak, but his throat had suddenly completely closed up. The crushing weight that had sat on his chest for the last 2 years, the suffocating terror of watching Lily struggle, the endless stack of red ink bills, the shame of pushing mop carts just to buy groceries shattered in an instant. A single jagged tear escaped his right eye, cutting a clean line down his grease-smudged cheek. He wiped it away furiously with the back of his hand. "I need to go to the hospital," Ainsley choked out, his voice thick with unspent emotion. "I need to tell her." "The money will be wired to your account before you reach the lobby," Bianca said softly, offering a genuine rare smile. "Go save your daughter, Ainsley. I'll expect you back here on Monday. You have a lot of machines to look at." Ainsley didn't say thank you. The words felt too incredibly small for what had just happened. Instead, he met Bianca's eyes, gave a sharp, perfectly executed Navy nod, and turned toward the door. As he walked out of the executive wing, stripping off the last remnants of the disposable Tyvek suit, the heavy bass hum of the Titangen X echoed up from the factory floor. It was a beautiful, flawless sound. It sounded like the future. And for the first time in a very long time, Ainsley Steves couldn't wait to hear what the future sounded like. If you loved this story about a desperate father outsmarting the world's top engineers to save his daughter, please hit that like button. Share this incredible story of real-world brilliance with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing, dramatic stories where the underdog comes out on top. Leave a comment below on what you thought of Ainsley's genius move.